my dear friends. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're flying south over the mountains of Peru to Arequipa, a colonial-era city and the second most populated city in Peru. We'll be spending the next 3 days in the region, continuing our adventures to uncover the magnificence of Peru, its people, and its culture. In the previous episode of Explorations, we walked through the streets of Lima while breaking down what it means for man to be free. During that journey, we uncovered that there are in fact 4 forms of freedom. Freedom from the chain, freedom from institutions, freedom from perception, and finally, freedom from the self. In today's episode, I want to continue to dive deeper into this idea of the self, that which is vulnerable to being constrained by the constraints of the world, as the Stoics would see it, and that which is vulnerable to the constraints imposed upon itself, as the Taoists would see it. If I am to free myself from myself, then it will be crucial to first define what the self is in the first place, and to understand its true nature. So, with that being said, let's begin our exploration into this idea, and welcome to Arequipa. Arequipa sits at about 2,300 meters above sea level, nestled between a number of volcanoes that are central to the city's skyline, folklore, and beliefs. The city is often referred to as Ciudad Blanca, or the White City, because of its colonial architecture built with white volcanic stone called sillar, which you can see prominently all throughout these streets. So, let's get back to it. Being true to oneself. It's an idea that has endured the test of time. There is a Greek maxim that can be found inscribed at the Temple of Delphi, supposedly instructed by the god Apollo himself, roughly translated as, "Know thyself." This is one of 3 maxims that can be found etched at the entrance of the temple. Clearly, to the Greeks, understanding oneself was the highest of virtues. But how does one know thyself, without first clearly defining what the nature of the self is? At first glance, the self can be construed as the reflection of the personal and social identity that we create. The I. It allows us to see ourselves as conscious entities, distinct from the rest of the animate and inanimate world, built over time through a collection of personal experiences and mental hardware that we possess. For the large part, this is how the self is understood by the scientific community, as science can only address what is observable and measurable. However, I believe there is a more nuanced distinction to be made here. I propose the idea that what we think of as the self is really 3 manifestations of our being, lying on a continuum that ranges from the inner depths of our being to the image that we create of ourselves to the outside world. These are the subconscious self, the conscious self, and the ego. The subconscious self is the engine that drives our being. It lives in the darkness, rarely visible or accessible to the conscious self or to the ego. It exists at birth as our natural instincts, something that Freud had referred to as the ID. The drive to hunt or to gather food when we are hungry, or the lust that arises from sexual arousal, or the need for affection from a mother. These are all behaviors that we naturally exhibit without any control. But as we move through life, every conscious experience we have had in the past, joyful, traumatic, or even the neutral experiences, leave imprints on the subconscious, creating learned instincts. The involuntary reflex of pulling away from fire because it burnt you once, or the fear of abandonment that arises because a parent was never around during your childhood, or your strive for perfection as an adult because you were taught that your value as a person is determined by the social success that you achieve. These are all examples of the learned instincts created by our subconscious self. For most of us, the subconscious plays the role of a master of puppets, subtly pulling at the strings to manipulate the way that we live our lives, while convincing us that we act on our own free will. It's about 4 a.m. in the morning, and today we have a long journey by bus to the Colca Valley to get our first experience of the Andes Mountains during this trip. I have to say, I'm a little bit worried as today we will climb up to 4,900 meters in elevation, and I really hope that I have acclimatized well enough. Now, the conscious self, on the other hand, is the awareness of our existence in the universe. To be clear, this awareness is not the I. This awareness comes through the sensations that we feel, the perceptions that we have, the emotions that move us, and the connections that we feel to this universe. Close your eyes for a second and imagine for a moment that you are the only object in the universe. Imagine that you are the universe. You would feel a oneness with everything around you, without the need to create a self-identity that distinguishes you from everything else. You simply feel, you simply are. This is the awareness of your conscious self. The conscious self is visible to all of us, but we're rarely attuned to it. Practices such as meditation are shortcuts to expose and to understand it. We become aware of our thoughts and the interferences that are created from the subconscious and the ego on the conscious self. The fully attuned conscious self is able to distinguish and to observe the noise created from both external and internal sources, such as the subconscious and the ego. It exists only in the present, as we can only be aware of our existence in the present. And the further that we float away into the past or into the future, the less that we identify with our conscious self. Finally, at the other end of the continuum is the ego, the mechanism through which the conscious and the subconscious selves interact with the outside world. And to exist in the outside world as a distinct entity, we created an identity, the I. And with this distinction comes the ability for us to reference and compare ourselves against other entities, resulting in emotions of the ego like shame, guilt, pride, confidence, anger, pleasure, righteousness, and so on and so forth. The ego is also responsible for the creation of memories and personal experiences through our interactions with the outside world. These memories and experiences then feed back into the subconscious, thereby closing the loop of the continuum of the self. Ultimately, though, the nature of the ego is to seek validation of our existence from the outside world through the imprints that we leave on it. A writer cannot merely keep his ideas in his mind. Those ideas must be shared with the world in order for him to identify himself as a writer. Hence, the ego seeks to validate the identities that we create. This quest for ever-increasing validation from the world grows into the ego's hunger for power. I must be all that I can be. And as such, the ego always works towards the future. It dreams and it desires, moving towards what it sees as its potential. Forever trapped in the dissatisfaction of the present, forever burdened with the hunger for more. So, which of these three manifestations of the self is the true master then? This depends on which part of the continuum you exist in. There are people who are instinctual, allowing their life to be driven by their subconscious or their gut, but not truly knowing why they do what they do. Then there are people driven by the ego, who exist out there, fully engaged in the physical world with a purpose to distinguish their individuality from the others around them. Then there are those who are more aligned to their conscious self, mindful that the present is all that truly exists, and able to filter out the noise that is surrounding them. It is only when we are fully attuned to our conscious self that we can be in complete harmony with our subconscious and with our ego. Without that, there will always be a constant tension between the three forms. We will be consumed by our past or by our future and not be able to fully engage with our present. The path to freedom requires the subconscious self and the ego to be clearly understood and controlled, leaving the conscious self to simply be. Okay, so we have talked about the nature of the self as three components. But how does this all tie back to our ideas on freedom that we explored in the last episode? The conscious self, which only exists in the present moment, tends to be in tension with the subconscious self, which is generated from our past experiences, and the ego, which works towards growing our identity into the future. Both of these are oppressors of our conscious present self. The question that I often find myself asking is, how can my will be truly free when what I think and do is controlled by my subconscious or my ego, both of which I am rarely aware of? I am simply programmed by nurture, environment, experiences, and ideas that I have accumulated over my life. To be free, I need to overcome all the definitions and the rules that I have created for myself and break loose of the chains that my very identity imposes upon me. Let's for a moment consider the example of the rational man, a man who prides himself in his rational, logical nature. The world loves the rational man. He is a problem solver, a decision maker, an efficient and productive member of society. Every action that he takes is driven by his rationality, and anything otherwise would simply be an insult to the intellect that he has sharpened over the course of his life. But when did the rational man's rationality begin? As a child, his parents and teachers taught him language, math, and science, and how to navigate the world efficiently by using these tools. But he was never taught anything about listening to his own heart or how to accept and deal with the abstract nature of the universe. Society convinced him that to be emotional was to lack control and alternatively, to be logical was worthy of merit. He could do anything that he set his mind to, but alas, nothing that he set his heart to. After all, it would be against his identity to do so. Clearly, the rational man's ability to think logically is formed through his experiences in life. It started with him practicing his use of logical thinking to solve real problems. But somewhere along the way, his ability to think rationally became an attribute of himself. He became the rational man. And from then on, he served this persona by using rational thought in all his actions, believing that he must be virtuous for looking at the world through his rational lens. How easy is it for the rational man to let his heart decide instead? Or to take a leap of faith, even if his ideas tell him not to? I'm using the story of the rational man simply to make a point. We are all born free. Then day after day, our experiences create imprints on our subconscious mind. The subconscious then gives birth to the ego, and from the ego arises the words, I am. To be free from the self is to dissolve the boundaries that define us. Just as our skin creates a boundary between our body and the air, our perceived reality is that we are individual entities distinct from the air around us. But as we zoom in closer and closer, we start to understand that it's all just empty space. We are in flux with what is around us. The atoms that create us blend with the air, and we are constantly being replenished into something new. A similar deceptive boundary exists in our self, created by the subconscious and the ego. As we live our lives, we collect experiences that we hold on to and define what we should be. We have a tendency to create these ideas of who we are and what we should be, and let ourselves be constrained by these boundaries. The words I am are the biggest and most dangerous oppressors of man's will. If we let the definitions that we have created drive us, then we are simply not free. We have given life to what we have created, and it has become our master. Why do you have to be a dancer to dance? Why do you have to be a painter just to paint? Or a singer to create melodies? Or a storyteller to dream and to write stories? The images that we have of ourselves and the ideas that we hold on to in society are simply ideas that are created in our minds and in the minds of others. Instead of letting these ideas be free, we have them engraved in our psyche and now use them to drive who we are and what we think. But remember, ideas can be forgotten. Ideas can change, and new ones can be created. This idea is the ego. There is a quote by an ancient Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, that I once read and somehow it still sticks with me today. If you want to become whole, let yourself be partial. If you want to become straight, let yourself be crooked. If you want to become full, let yourself be empty. If you want to be reborn, let yourself die. If you want to be given everything, then give everything up. To me, this is freedom. Let the dancer paint. Let the painter sing. Let the singer write fantastical stories about dancers who paint, sing, and write. Forget all the definitions that you create for yourself. Every idea that we construct in our mind is an illusion. The ideas that we carry around us and nurture today stemmed from just a single thought in the past. If you believe that you have the ability to change through your experiences, then it becomes completely reasonable that the erosion of these ideas from your past can stem from just another thought today. These ideas are all our subjective truths, truths that are never constant. They simply ebb and flow across the boundaries that we have created for ourselves. Remember then that the I that we know is not who we really are. It is simply a caricature that we have drawn of ourselves, constantly being added to. In fact, we are the artist controlling the pen. The drawing, the paper, the pen, and even the hands. These are all servants to the artist's being. The artist does not choose his creation based on the grade of pencil that he has or the type of paper that he's using. No, he freely chooses the tools he needs to achieve whatever he is aiming to create. The key to freedom from self is striving for an awareness of why we think the way we think or do what we do. It requires shining a light onto our will and identifying the forces that nudge us. It requires understanding the subconscious and destroying the ego. So, be a master of yourself. Go where you want to go. Love who you want to love. Be who you truly want to be. You are the artist. The only human truth is that you exist. So loosen up on your ideas and do whatever it takes to make your existence count.